I feel like everyone always says, this is the hardest project I've ever done. And I can honestly feel like this project wasn't all that difficult, but that's because I already made something really similar, the cabinet that has some shelves in it in the last video, and I worked out a lot of the details there. This is relatively the same shape with just some drawers and a custom textured face. So how much harder can it be? And of course, before I started anything, I worked out all the details in CAD. You can download the Autodesk Fusion 360 file for free. I'll link to it. Go and check it out. The last video talked about how I use the CNC to cut these curves out. But one of the problems about removing a lot of material and stock from wood is that the moisture content of it changes and the wood shrinks on that side. And this caused some warpage. Now I wanted to have concealed drawer slides, so I picked the Blum hardware and designed everything around the specifications of these. And that meant I was going to have to actually block out my sides in order for the hardware to have something perfectly parallel to sit on and have everything clear my real curvy face frame. Now, since I was going to already do the drawer slide block out pieces, I could use the CNC to precisely drill the holes right where I needed them for the drawer slides. And once I put the blockouts down on my side, I could really see how much they warped. And I had to figure out a way to solve this problem. Now I decided to use the CNC to solve this problem. And I took it over, and my CNC table is perfectly level with my ground. So I could drop my workpiece back onto the table and shim it up and level it until it was also perfectly level. And this would be good enough for the precision I'd require for this type of operation. I could then machine away the warped middle area inside of the side pieces so that these blockouts would perfectly fit into the sides. Now, if you know anything about wood movement, you can't glue in these blockout pieces directly to the sides. The wood is perpendicular to the grain movement, and you would get cracking if you glued it in. It just wouldn't work. The way I was going to solve this was just by screwing it in and putting a dab of glue either in the middle or the front, and that way I could control where the expansion of the wood would happen without causing any cracking. And I figured I could just do the trick of elongating the screw holes to allow for movement by kind of wiggling a drill bit back and forth. And yeah, that didn't really work all that great. It just broke off. My back piece is veneered MDF, and you don't really have to worry about expansion with MDF. So I just went ahead and dominoed it together and glued it on. And really you can have whatever crazy shape you want for your carcass, just as long as the drawer slides are just parallel to each other. I decided to do this by using the back as a 90-degree reference to those drawer slide blockouts. And that worked pretty well. I did wait until one side was completely dry before removing clamps and then carefully gluing the other side also perfectly perpendicular to the back side. I cut the face frames out on the CNC, and I talked a lot about this in the last video, so there's not really a lot more to go into. But one of the things I had to do was also cut a bottom piece to the face frame and then go ahead and domino it on. So I carefully mark out where it needs to be, even use micrometers, and then I go ahead and put my piece and cut out the domino hole, the mortise, and then glue everything together, only to realize I had put my piece on the wrong side of the line and it was completely too high. So back to cutting it off and starting over again. Now this wasn't too big of a deal because that cut off domino will be hidden on the inside and you won't really see it because there's going to be a drawer face there. Yeah, sometimes you can just hide your mistakes. Sometimes the tiniest details will make a huge impact on a piece. And I put a slight chamfer on the inside just to give it a little bit more depth. Now those sides aren't straight, I've already talked about that, and I needed a way to attach the top to those sides. And this presented another challenge. I just drew a line on the inside and I decided to use a slight shim on the bottom of my domino and just freehand the joinery, just kind of matching the line, the curved line, and doing it first on the top and then matching it on the sides. And it turns out that this worked pretty darn well. Everything lined up without any trouble, and so I was quite pleased with this result. I did a typical glue up. I used Type Bond 1 because this won't be in a high moisture area and it tends to dry pretty quickly. After it dried and I could take the clamps off, again, that wonky side was curved inward and I had to somehow blend it in. And I just went ahead and used my sander, whatever you call these things, the sanding disc on my grinder to grind it a little bit smoother and then just hand sand it out until it blended really nicely. This type of slight variation in the curve you won't even notice when you look at the piece. I've become a real big fan of the domino. This is just a great tool. And yeah, I do have a CNC machine, but trying to line up everything and get everything dialed in just perfectly on the CNC is just a ton of time and maybe slightly off. Whereas bringing the tool to the workpiece just has a huge advantage. And this piece has a lot of domino floating tenon joinery to hold everything together, including the face frame. Now, before I did any of the glue up, I put another one of those chamfers on the inside of the carcass and on the inside of the face frame because this will just add a nice little detail in the finished piece. During the glue up, I had to be really careful to get all that glue out of that little chamfer because I didn't want to stand out and look funny with glue in it. I didn't talk about it earlier, but this whole piece is almost entirely made out of cherry with the exception of the drawers. I like to use maple for drawers. It's just a slight contrast and it's just something I like doing. I prepared all the drawer stock using the traditional woodworking machines, the joiner, the planer, and the table saw to do all the cuts. Once I had the pieces at their very specific sizes that I needed, I could start doing some CNC dovetail joinery. I have a series of videos describing how to exactly do dovetail joinery in the CNC, and I get great results when I do this. And it's not too time consuming. It probably took me a couple of days to do all the drawers, and that means 3 drawers. I didn't feel like cutting out the drawer bottoms in the table saw. It was just easier to let the CNC to precisely cut them out. The drawer sides need a groove cut in the bottom for the drawer bottoms to fit into, and usually you would use a dado stack in your table saw, but I find it easier and just more repeatable to kind of dial in your thickness on the CNC and to just cut the stop dados on the CNC machine. The inside of the drawers were sanded to 220 because it's easier to sand before you do the glue up. And I have a whole video on how I glue up drawers, and the technique and method for doing it makes them turn out pretty square. The drawer fronts have their own face frame around the edge of them, and I had to cut these out on the CNC machine because they had slight curves to them. And using a CNC isn't like you're just popping pieces out and magically getting everything perfect. I struggled a lot with getting chip out on the pieces. In particular, this one little corner, the end grain was just at the wrong angle where it would always want to chip out. And I really couldn't find a good solution for this. And in the end, it didn't matter too much. But I did do a ton of test cuts to try and just figure it out. And then it was on to cutting a groove for the middle of the drawer faces, at which I could actually work on that part. I used double-sided tape to hold my pieces down, but also clamped it just to ensure nothing would come loose. And I did the texture pattern in Vectric V-Carve because it has a pretty good ability to do something like this. I shared the V-Carve file in the downloads, so if you want to check it out, you can download it and play around with it. Notice I took the time to actually move each of the clamps to avoid hitting them. And I probably didn't need the clamps, but I only wanted to do this once. All right, take a look at the drawer faces and notice that the grain of the drawers runs perpendicular to the grain of the side pieces. If you know anything about wood movement, then you know that I can't just glue these things in, as it would probably crack when the wood swells and changes over time. I decided to treat it like a breadboard end with a really long tenon in the middle, and to glue it in the middle and then pin it on the ends. I needed a way to transfer those holes from the side frames into the face frames, so I loosely assembled everything and made the gap exactly what I wanted it to be. I could then use the existing holes on the side pieces as kind of a guide to drill pilot holes through the textured drawer front faces. I elongated the holes a bit on the drill press, but I don't have a dowel maker, but that's no problem with a CNC machine. I could quickly mill some out on my vertical table. For the assembly process, I would just put a dab of glue in the middle of the face frame, and then I would pound in the dowels into the holes, which are elongated on the face frame to allow wood movement. And this will act like a breadboard and hopefully keep the face frames flat over time. Now, I'm not going to buy some drawer pulls when I can make them out of wood. Okay, all the parts are done and I'm ready to finish. I plan to use Osmo for the main carcass, but I wanted to spray the drawers because it might be a little bit more durable. However, my finish was just a little bit too old, so I did 2 coats of Osmo Poly-X on everything in satin. At this point, everything was ready for assembly. I could screw in the drawer slides and put the hardware on the drawer bottoms. For attaching the face frames to the drawers, I was going to go with the technique of drilling through the handle holes to hold it on and then put the screws in the back of the drawers, but it was sagging down and I just didn't like that technique for this particular instance. Instead, I shimmed the bottom drawer face and screwed it on, and then I could do the next drawer face, and at that point I didn't have any room to get my hands in and do the top one. For the top piece, I had the screws just sticking slightly proud, and I could just push in my face frame onto them, and it would leave a slight indentation that I could then drill some pilot holes onto, and this worked great for precisely aligning it. Now onto my favorite part. Let's see what it looks like. Thanks again everyone for watching this video, and if you want to support my channel, just like and subscribe. If you want to get the files, I shared them as a free download, and you can go to my website, the link is down in the description. Bye everyone.